Thank you very much. So, welcome everybody. On behalf of the DIAMAS Project and SPARC Europe, I'd like to welcome you to this DIAMAS event. DIAMAS, developing institutional open access publishing models to advance scholarly communication with a focus on Diamond OA, meaning free to the reader and author, a no-fee publishing model. That's what we're focusing on. My name is Vanessa Proudman. I'm the director of SPARC Europe. And I'm also proud to be the DIAMAS work package lead, where we are exploring and supporting the sustainability of institutional publishing. And SPARC Europe is working to make open the default in Europe, but not at all costs. Equity is central to this mission. And our involvement in DIAMAS addresses two of our strategic goals: to gain more equity in implementing the open access publishing agenda, and to help sustain and secure the valuable investments we have made in quality scholarly publishing ecosystem, from journals to directories to publishing platforms. And whilst the OA Diamond model has been the norm for many in Latin America and for some countries in Europe that are highly organized, like Croatia or Spain, we're also seeing European nations now formally committing to more equitable pathways to open access, as seen in last year's European Council conclusions, for example. We are also seeing countries establishing infrastructures to support OA Diamond. We have the action plan for Diamond OA, and we see the Global Federation of Diamond Open Access on the horizon, which promises to boost progress and capacity in this very important area. So it's exciting times for Diamond OA. So whilst Diamond OA is free to the reader and author with no fee publishing models, as a no fee publishing model, there is a cost. This has a cost. So who bears that cost? How and for how long? These are critical considerations for many small and medium-sized publishers and service providers to secure their future. We've learned that institutional publishers and service providers are most diverse in nature, and the sustainability challenges, the choices and the options available to them vary based on their missions, size, and the services they provide. So today we are bringing together 4 studies on this important topic to help us understand this landscape, to provide the evidence above all needed to make the case for sustaining OA Diamond, and to help develop a pathway to a more equitable and sustainable future for scholar-led institutional publishing. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our speakers to you and show you the agenda. So we have, one second here, Victoria Brun, Research Assistant from CNRS. If you'd like to say hello. Thank you, Victoria. Mikael Laakso, who is the project researcher at TSV in Finland. Mikael, have you got your camera on?
Here I am.
So everybody else, yes, there you are. Thank you. We've got Eva Milinskak-Slodi, who's a librarian at the University of Zagreb, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. Hello, Eva. Thank you for joining us. Myself, and I'm the director of SPARC Europe. And then we've got David Pontiel, who's senior researcher also at CNRS, CSI. And last but not least, we have Didier Tourney, senior researcher at CNRS, CSI. Have you got your camera on? I don't see you. Didier.
I'm here.
Excellent. Okay, so we really look forward to all of these colleagues. They are part of the DIAMAS project, but they've also been involved in other studies. So we're bringing a number of studies together to give you a much more comprehensive overview of this important topic, as I said. So our agenda today is, firstly, Eva will take us through what do we actually mean by sustainability. And then we will look at 4 different studies, very short summaries of some of those findings and recommendations. First of all, the OA Diamond Journal study I will report on. We've then, I'll hand that over to Didier Tourné, talking about supporting Diamond open access journals in practice. And then we have Michael Luxo talking about public funding of scholarly journals in Europe as the third study. And the fourth study, which is what we are also today launching the report of more than 18 months of work. Victoria Brunn will be talking about the sustainability of Diamond OA and lessons from the DIAMAS studies, because there's been a lot of research going on in the background over the last 1.5 years. We'll then have a short panel discussion and also have time for Q&A and a short wrap up. So that's where we are with our agenda. So I hope that you'll stay with us till the end. So let me now start by passing on to Aoife.
Thank you, Vanessa. As Vanessa announced, I will briefly talk about the concept of sustainability as we understand it and use it in the DIAMAS project. Early on in the project, at the beginning phase of our work, we realized that there is no certainty that we all share the same understanding of this concept when we speak of it. There was no well-established and well-known definition of sustainability in publishing, and even in this domain, it was prevalently used in different contexts, for instance, as related to environmental sustainability or sustainable development goals, and not as referring to funding and resource issues. There was also a linguistic diversity that became obvious in our multilingual project team. It seems that the term had different connotations in different languages. It could imply only long-term survival, but it could also implicate independence, reasonable development, persistence, or living on without resource depletion or harming to the respective ecosystem. It was clear that it is a complex concept. It included both very abstract aspects, those related to value systems and decisions on what is worth sustaining, but it also had to cover some very practical ones, like thinking about accounting or fiscal reporting practices and so on. The next slide, please. There were several questions concerning sustainability that we found relevant and important to consider. The first one I already mentioned. Is sustainability only focused on survival, and to what extent it should also imply development and evolvement? It is rather clear that existence implies change and dynamics, and that publishing without some kind of transformative practices could not be sustainable. In addition to continuation of operation, there is also a problem of preservation of content that needs to be addressed. And then further on, how is sustainability related to growth, to quality, and to success? That is, of course, dependent on the initial expectations of different types of organizations active in publishing. And finally, there is a great importance of underlying infrastructures and their role, which cannot be overestimated. Next slide, please. There are also questions of what, who, and how in this system. We can have different perspectives on what is sustainable. Is it a journal, a publisher, a certain service provider, or an infrastructure, a particular business model? Or it can be a wider publishing ecosystem, for instance, a national journal publishing system as a whole. And who is then responsible for sustaining them? Which stakeholder or group of stakeholders? One individual journal or publisher might not be in complete control of its own sustainability. And that is why we see that the role of communities and governance models has vast importance. Next slide, please. We can also speak of different ways of how to achieve sustainability, and we can here mention only a few, like more successful strategies in acquiring resources, more efficient ways of using the available resources, sharing those resources, building common infrastructures, and so on. And the final slide. So finally, we have agreed on the definition of sustainability of publishers and service providers, which includes all of the aforementioned issues. It is the capacity to develop and implement feasible medium-term research strategies to facilitate the consistent execution of editorial tasks, incorporating essential developmental elements for adhering to globally recognized quality standards in both editorial work and publishing, all while guaranteeing the continuous accessibility of published content. This capacity can depend on the IPSP's internal resources and expectations, the contextually available funding and workforce sources, and the effectiveness of the strategies deployed. Thank you. This is where I will stop and leave the floor to the actual research results.
Thank you so very much, Eva, for sketching out that complex theme that we all so care about so very much. And we've put a lot of thought into that. Fortunately, we have come up with this definition going forward with DIAMAS. But now, as Eva said, we are going to move to look at the different studies that have been looking at the financial sustainability of OA Diamond since 2021. And I'm going to start with the OA Diamond Journal study. So I was very fortunate to be one of those and leading the financial sustainability part of this study back in the day in 2021. And it was really a very unique study funded by SPARC Europe and Coalition S, really looking at the first time at the landscape of OA Diamond publishing globally. If you haven't already read it, but I think 19,000 or more of you have been reading the findings, recommendations, and dataset, please do take a look. But I'm just going to sketch out what were some of those findings. It's clearly a wide archipelago of relatively small journals. We estimated them at around 29,000 at the time. And they're not just focused in the area of humanities and social sciences, but there was a significant group also that was serving STM. And they're also very valuable to communities that are non-English language speaking. Often they are written locally, but they are also read internationally, either in English or in the non-English languages. And there's frequently a strong multilingual focus. As regards effectiveness, if we're thinking about how to become more effective and efficient, there's clearly a strong dependence on volunteering. We'll come back to that later, also with some of my other colleagues. But of course, if it's a focus on volunteers and strong individuals, there's then a lack of coordination amongst many journals. So we were also promoting and recommending to share services and platforms, that more of those are needed to be more effective going forward. And that we identified a wide diversity of funding models. Before I take you through those, if we were recommending to use more infrastructures and services that benefit many. Here you have a range of national publishing platforms that serve their own national communities, but also that branch out to communities outside of their countries, like at Open Edition, for example. Or we have big publishing infrastructures like Redelic in Latin America, or we have software platforms like PKP that serve many publishers worldwide. So a wide range, and these are really essential to the ecosystem. So encouraging that those be used. We identified a wide range of funding models. So how do they financially sustain themselves? The institution is really key for in-kind support. A lot of voluntary labor, as I already mentioned, grants even to support operations. Collectively organized funding like SCOS was mentioned. There are also donations made by individuals or by organizations. Shared infrastructure is sometimes used to bring in income to an institution or to a service. And membership is also a popular means of accruing income. Freemium services, of course, and then specific models like subscribe to open and more, and this is growing. So what we found also that relying on one single source of funding is really clearly a threat, though, to the journal sustainability. You can't put all of your eggs in one basket. It's important that you have a balance and a good combination of 2 or 3 revenue streams. But how does that affect you as an organization? We'll hear about that a little bit later. So as regarding the cost and the financial sustainability of OA Diamond journals, as mentioned, it largely depends on volunteers, universities and government. And were it not for the goodwill of so many of those volunteers, the costs of diamond journals would be much higher than they are. We see that at the time with this study, over 60% were running on less than 10,000 euros per year, and 70% were running on 1 to 2 FTE. And I think that is still rings true today. We did see at the time of this study that 25% were really operating at a loss, so there was a clear need for additional funds. So what did we suggest for going forward to how to fund OA Diamond? What we've identified in the study was that RPOs, national government agencies, publishers, learned societies were the largest funders, and we encouraged them to continue to fund clearly. But that support was falling short of the current needs for some, as I just mentioned. So it's really key that they continue to fund operations, so not just innovation, but operations, and more consistently and on an annual basis. And we were also appealing to research funding of organizations who were largely absent and still are in this space so far. And we were encouraging that libraries and others increase collective funding initiatives, because small contributions can go a long way. And lastly, we appealed to some of the larger funders to develop national and international funding strategies for the next 5 years to think about how to fund Diamond going forward. Above all, to help them meet industry standards and to also help develop shared services or infrastructure that benefit many. Those really need our attention and our funding going forward as well. But funders, they also need guidance on funding principles and selection criteria based on a range of goals and priorities that are true to them. But how do they make those choices of what to fund? So they need advice on how to fund what, and also beyond grants. So what are those other different mechanisms? So if you'd like any more information on that study, this was just a reminder. Those are the links and you can reach me. But I'd like to now pass on to Didier Tournay. He will tell us about what is the appetite and the feasibility of directly funding Diamond OA. He looked into that with his study. I'm going to stop sharing so that he can share his slides.
It's done, Vanessa.
Sorry?
It's done, Vanessa. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello to everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm gonna give you the results of a study, which is a follow-up study, which has been published by the Nordic Journal of Library and Information Studies at the end of last year. So you can find the whole thing. Of course, it was not only open access, but it's a Diamond open access journal. So this is really a follow-up of a study. We're still working on journals, and we used the database of journals that have been answering the open access Diamond journal study in order to send them a follow-up survey. The aim was really clear. It was to follow one of the recommendations, which was also to fund directly journals. So the question was, do these journals use money? Do they need more money? On which kind of act and tasks they're going to use it? Are they able to handle all this? So 4 questions we asked them into different ways. So they precise things. I won't get into it. What are the actual monetary needs of these journals? What are the additional financial needs of this journal once they use money? What is their current capacity to engage monetary transactions? Because we know some of them are not able to do that. And finally, what is their ability to meet research funding organization requirements? We chose research funding organizations because we knew from the previous study presented by Vanessa that they are currently not really part of a funding landscape system. Contrary to other organizations, just like universities, libraries, and so on. So the results. So the first thing here, you can see, of course, I won't get into detail. In green, you have a percentage of a given task, the first one being, for example, the reception of a manuscript, that leads to monetary transaction from the point of view of the journal. You can see, of course, all of them are in the minority column. The red one is no. The first group is really interesting. It's the certification acts. That's where, of course, they take care of a manuscript, they evaluate them, the reviewing, and so on. So this is really low. The second part is really the production acts. And the final part is really the dissemination acts, like assigning a permanent identification or putting the document online. So here what we see, of course, is that the majority of journals and the majority of acts are not giving a monetary transaction, but of course that doesn't mean there's no cost, and that doesn't mean that some people are getting paid from the point of view of a journal. But then the question is, okay, they're underfunded, but what would happen if they had the money? So that's the second part, the second result. That is, they would use this money to pay some acts, but not all of them. And you can see that in the center of the diagram, it's really the material production of articles that is the most important thing for them to pay if they had more money. So this is an important result. That is, the money, of course, won't be used to get into the pockets of shareholders, but really to produce articles from manuscripts. All the green bars are going a little bit up, but the production part is really the one that is growing the most. But then the question is, are these people, some of them we know they are because they're already using them, able to engage in transaction that is both receiving money and spending money? Because if they had certainly more money coming from a research funding organization, would they be able to handle them? And so the answer is globally yes. You can see the last line, 86% on the receiving side, 85% on the spending side. So if mechanisms coming from RFOs to these journals would be put in place, the vast majority of them would be able to receive money to spend it. Would it be directly or would it be through third-party organization? Finally, would they be able to answer RFO's requirements? We know that because of the result, 56% of the journals, they carry out a minimal acknowledgement of research funding. This could seem low, but in fact, compared to the literature, this is really common. This is the kind of figures you find into the literature, not considering only Diamond OA journals. But will they be able to produce a report? That is, you can imagine RFOs would ask them, okay, we want to give you some money. What kind of research that interests us has been published? And a third of them would be able to produce a report. But if a financial mechanism would be put in place, 73% of the rest would be able to do it. So once again, a majority, not the totality of the journals, would be able to meet the kind of requirements that are usually demanded by RFOs. So to conclude, in the current world, RFOs are putting a lot of money to commercial publishers through APCs. And so what we propose is that some of this money or other money would be put into the Diamond system. Would it be practical? The answer is yes. These journals are currently underfunded. If they use the money for mostly article production, most of them are able to manage income. And finally, they're willing to report and meet LFO's requirements. So that's it. Of course, the other questions are what kind of practical mechanism from the point of view should be put in place, and how to avoid what has happened to IPC journals, that is one way or another predatory publishing or pressure to publish, not depending on the quality of the scientific input into the manuscript. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Didier, for that. How important it is for funders to know that it is practical and that they can manage the income. So thank you for sharing those insights with us. If you have any questions, by the way, to either myself or Didier, please do put them in the chat and they will be answered directly as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you have questions for all of us more generally and for the panel discussion, please put those in the chat as well. But now I'm going to pass on to the third study to Michael Laxo, and I think he needs no introduction. He's very well known for his work on the economics of publishing, and he's going to be talking about public funding of scholarly journals in Europe. Over to you, Michael. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Didier, also for warming up the audience here for provocative talks about who should pay or who could pay. I think that was a very good opening. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mikael, and I assist the Federation of Learned Societies here in Finland with the DIAMAS project. And the study I'm going to talk about now isn't integrated into the DIAMAS project because it was actually initiated slightly before and finalized during the start of the DIAMAS project, but I think it's very not overlapping, but synergetic with the goals of the DIAMAS project to think about how journals in Europe could, should be funded by public funds in order to enable diamond publishing. So together with, let's see if I can get the next slide, together with my colleague from the University of Oulu, Anna-Maija Multas, we conducted a study funded by the Association of Scholarly Publishing in Finland, where we were tasked with figuring out how are different countries in Europe facilitating, if they are, monetarily the publication of journals within their respective countries. And I think the question was so tantalizingly simple, like, why hasn't anyone done this before? I think this should have been done before, and someone should actually pick up where we left off, because even though DIAMAS project is doing a lot of exploration on the economics of diamond OA publishing, I think specifically this could be a sustainable offshoot to continue on with the open data set that we provided through this study, which I'll describe soon, to create an even, of course, more up-to-date and comprehensive knowledge base about what are some potential ways that different countries can support these types of funding operations. But yes, so the data was collected already in 2021, and the study was published last year. And it's open access to read from the journal Science and Public Policy. And there were basically two different parts to the study. One was just to figure out what is the scope of both open access publication and particularly open access publication for small and medium-sized publishers in each European country. That was one part. For that, we used bibliometrics. The second part was about figuring out these funding mechanisms. So how well can we, by all means capable to us from our desks, by contacting people, by doing different searches, looking up ministry pages, looking up university pages in different countries, how much evidence can we gather of funding mechanisms and evidence that different countries are supporting journal publishing? And we also had a period of having the manuscript as an open preprint, also to solicit even more information that we might have missed during our first scan. So I think we did our best as a first shot, but as I said, this could and should be continued by someone or something, since basically the readiness is there to create something more sustainable out of that. And for the bibliometric part, this is the map of Europe, where we see both the numbers here of the number of journals published by small and mid-sized publishers. And these were publishers that publish less than 100 journals. So yes, they are quite big. For example, in Finland, most publishers publish only one journal. So having the threshold for mid-sized as 99 might have been a tad high, but you can adjust your own thresholds based on the data if you would like to. But we had to put the bar somewhere to at least isolate the really huge ones from our observations. And the shading here that goes from pale to an overripe orange or rust, whatever the color could be here, is the degree of open access for these journals. So you see that some countries are really hot and some are slightly cooler in their color when it comes to the degree of open access. And I think this could probably be taken as some kind of additional evidence when we start looking at the different funding mechanisms to think about the size and scope, and first, of course, also language aspects when it comes to how national funding is organized, if it's organized. Some could say I'm biased. We found that Finland is among the 2 countries in the most inclusive category of funders, public funders. Basically, we fund and give state subsidies to any peer-reviewed journals that fills specific or fairly, I would say, lax criteria, so that if you are a serious operation and can prove that you are that, you will get some degree of funding. But then there's other countries where there might be time limitations. There's competitive funding in many countries that are akin to like sending in a research application where only a certain percentage get funding for a set number of years. And then there's big countries where we couldn't find any evidence of public funding. So no big organized funding rounds or anything at least publicized that we could document. But I would be happy to see that I'm wrong here. That we actually have better circumstances, because I think for supporting Diamond and for supporting non-profit publishing, it's probably a more effective way to publish journals and publishers through the back door rather than the APC route. But that's, of course, that was my personal voice talking and not anything that's anchored here in the research. But if you're interested in more detail, there's a supplement to the actual article. If you scroll down to the page, there's a huge spreadsheet where we gathered these funding links and some criteria for the funding. So you can have a look at that. And then there's the data set of journals that also made available. But my time is running out. I have to be fast. So some of the observation was that there seems to be quite diverse approaches to this. So even though we see that Europe is in many ways has a lot of commonality, and some could say provocatively in like an OA bubble, that we are funding certain OA mechanisms pretty aggressively that no other countries are as keenly into. But that doesn't seem to be the case with this public funding. There's a lot of diversity in how countries are approaching this. And from what we could gather, there's often a requirement for open access for these public funding mechanisms. So that's, you can see it as good or bad, but it's a thing. So many of these funding mechanisms, be them very inclusive or competitive, often have the clause nowadays of the grantee, the receiving journal, having to be open access. And then, again, this might be a personal take here, again, the last bolded point, that maybe we could start thinking cross-border, that maybe we wouldn't need to be so nationalistic. Maybe we could pool money internationally somehow to fund also journals that are not completely international. So maybe we could find something there to enable also these journals to grow and sustain and to do even better by collaborating on their resourcing. So a bit of a provocativeness there. But that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you again for the provocations. That's always good for questions and for the discussion further on. Thank you so much for that. Also showing the real diversity in Europe, even though we are talking about publicly funding Diamond, and also for some of your thoughts about the future. So last up, I'm going to hand us over to Victoria Brun, who has been working with the French team, so Didier Tournay and David Pontil, on the sustainability of Diamond OA lessons from the DIAMAS studies. I'm thrilled to tell you that we are publishing the research report, which Victoria will take us through. She will have a bit more time than the rest of us, obviously, because today we're launching that report. We will be putting that in the chat for you, so it's really hot off the press. So over to you, Victoria. Thank you so much.
So yeah, thank you, Vanessa. Good afternoon to all. So I will present with David Ponty. So we will present the results of an investigation we conducted with Didier Tournay as part of the DIAMAS project, as Vanessa explained it. So this investigation focused on the funding practices of institutional publishers and service providers. We chose not only to list and sort out funding practices, but also to ask what they mean in terms of sustainability for their structures and the services they provide. So the aim of the study was to understand what does financial sustainability means for institutional publishing in Europe. To carry out this investigation, we drew on diverse methods. So we started with a literature review to understand what we already know about funding practices to publish Diamond OA, and the literature was not so big. We identified blind spots, but we addressed with quantitative and qualitative data. So we started from the DIAMAS survey disseminated in spring 2023. And to gather complementary information, we devised a new survey focused on ordinary funding practices. So this one was disseminated to the same respondents. And we also interviewed some of the representatives of these IPSPs from various countries during 6 focus groups and 15 interviews. So by definition, Diamond IPSPs do not fund their activities with other fields. So we were wondering where their resources come from. Budget of Diamond IPSPs, we found, come from limited sources. We found that 2/3 of Diamond IPSPs financially rely on their parent organization and 1/3 on public, national, or regional organization. Very few of them, in fact, rely on voluntary offer contribution, sales, or loans to fund their activities. We also note that some IPSPs changed their practices and notably flipped to open access to meet funders' requirements. Hence, it seems that funders' requests could help to spread good practices. So we saw that Diamond IPSPs get money from several sources, but having money induces managing it. So we also were interested in the way in which IPSPs manage their money. So when we interviewed IPSPs, they shared their concerns about the volume of work that represent income management. Income management involves 2 kinds of operations. First, reporting. So must IPSPs track their expenses and revenues to meet public subsidy requirements, or to follow the formal accounting practices of their parent organizations. Yet, it requires time and skilled people to do it well. There are also time lags between the moments where IPSPs act for money, get it, and justify their expenses. The second operation is fundraising. So applying for a time-limited funding brings precariousness and instability in IPSPs' activities. It demands a lot of employees' time, which could have been dedicated to core IPSP tasks. Instead, although the application outcome is uncertain. We found also that it brings a risk of breaking the services continuity and the skills transmission if some jobs depend on funding application. So here lies a paradox. Getting funding can become a financial burden in some circumstances. So since the beginning, I talk a lot about monetary resources, but our investigation stresses the key role of another aspect. IPSPs actually rely more on in-kind work than monetary resources. For IPSPs who have one, Parent organizations are a great provider of in-kind support. The areas in which they support the most IPSPs are RT services, human resource management, financial and legal services, and salaries of permanent staff. In a nutshell, IPSPs will not run without all the services enabled by in-kind support. IPSPs we interviewed also underlined that their activities are based on the strong commitment of their staff. Employees have a strong sense of community that favors the sustainability of institutional publishing. Not only the workforce within IPSPs is central to keep them running. In fact, where are the IPSPs who centralize all their activities? Most of them outsource some services, and especially production and IT services, which represents the most technical part of their activities. We found also that peer-to-peer collaboration are rare and nowadays more about political lobbying or circulation of educational material. 60% also expressed their wish to collaborate with other IPSPs in order to save costs in several areas in priority: IT services, production services, training, and advice. But they currently have some difficulties to collaborate. Firstly, because a major part of the external services rely on voluntary and in-kind work, as I mentioned. Secondly, because the local scale is the most operable according to the IPSPs we interviewed, and they are not always IPSPs with the complementary competencies around. Thirdly, IPSPs reported administrative obstacles to collaborate, for example, to share a part-time employee between two organizations. And I leave the floor to David.
Thank you. So another important aspect relates to infrastructure, as already mentioned in the previous presentations. IPSP regularly rely on publishing infrastructures as they collaborate with either shared global infrastructures with commercial publishers or with hosting publishing solution in the form of a national platform or PKP production. This shows clearly the key role of infrastructure in the publishing ecosystem. IPSPs develop different types of relationships with infrastructures, especially non-commercial ones. Some are based on mere usage, others on in-house development and integration of existing infrastructure. This relationship can also involve direct personal interactions and commitments, or occur through donation and support. Thus, current infrastructures are key to making the entire diamond ecosystem sustainable. Acknowledging it is crucial since 60% of IPSPs report financial constraints in providing adequate resources for the infrastructure and publishing services. When asked about their desired future, IPSPs have a clear view of the challenges they face. The main ones are the need for more financial resources and the lack of permanence in personnel. With more resources, IPSP will primarily invest in personnel to extend their publishing functionalities and services, notably on production tasks. Besides, more funding would mean being able to transform some unpaid tasks into paid tasks. If more permanent funding were available, more extensive editorial and technical practices would be prioritized, but with less urgency. Regarding the desired future, IPSPs advocate strengthening current funding bodies and involving research funding organizations. They also agree about the rejection of author-pays models. The diamond ecosystem is all but a univocal, well-integrated whole. On the opposite, IPSPs are part of an archipelago made of various sizes and concerns, with diverse funding schemes and different organizational arrangements. Such an archipelago of institutional publishers and service providers must be recognized for their continued support. This entails some practical consequences. Firstly, there is no universal good practices or standard that can be adequately applied. Any criteria or action dedicated to sustaining the ecosystem should deal with and preserve this diversity. Secondly, the sustainability and development of this ecosystem require more funding, both in cash and personnel. However, these funds need to be provided in ways that do not generate significant additional administrative labor and thus transform grants into financial burdens. So as a kind of wrap-up, here are 5 appropriate ways to sustain the diamond ecosystem. First, obviously, the perpetuation and the development of permanent public funding, including national funders, is a crucial path to follow. The permanent funding for local initiative is vital to uphold and stimulate biodiversity. Second, in parallel, international funding would bring more resources and empowerment for IPSP with no support from local environment or national policies. More stakeholders who have a key interest in open access should contribute to the funding of Diamond OA. Third, despite their widespread presence, time-limited grants are not designed to sustain OA Diamond institutional publishing. They should be avoided or restricted to very specific tasks. Fourth, publishing infrastructure are the key area to transform practices at a large scale. So we recommend providing funding for the maintenance and operation of this infrastructure, ideally recurring and stable funding. It is vital to support infrastructure that serve many small and mid-sized IPSPs. Finally, in-kind and voluntary work is a prerequisite for the very existence and perpetuation of the diamond ecosystem. Any action that will bring greater recognition and reward, dedicated budget and support for such a work is therefore strongly promoted. And as Vanessa just explained, you can find more results in the research report that just came out yesterday, and you can have direct access with this link to Zenodo platform. And that's it.
Thank you so very much for being so on time. We're ahead of time. So thank you. There is a lot to unpack from the DIAMAS study. Thank you so much for that. You have the link in the chat to the report, and there is also a data set. So I'd like to now introduce you to the panel. So all the speakers who spoke so far, except myself, because I'm running the panel, I'd like to invite you to open up your cameras if you haven't already done so, and the other ones perhaps close your cameras. So there are some real commonalities between these different studies, and there are some differences. What I'd like to start with, though, is, so we've done a lot of research here over the years, and I think we can say that we've gained quite a good understanding of the needs for Diamond OA publishing. But what is next? What should be funded and by whom? But first of all, what should be funded? We heard David saying that we should particularly look at large-scale infrastructure, but does the panel agree? Is that the only thing that we should be really focusing on? I'm not saying that that's what David said, but panelists, as a result of the study, the studies that we have done, if we have attracted an interest of funders in the audience today, I hope some of them are with us today, from research funders, from institutions, from charities, ministries, libraries, and others who want to step up and fund more, to help them make choices on what to fund. What should they be funding? What should they perhaps start with? what has priority in your view? Who would like to start? Don't all jump at once.
I can, Vanessa, if you wish.
Yes, thank you.
So, in a sense, we know that everything has to be funded because it's currently very underfunded. So it both depends on, let's say, the legal possibilities and the missions of the organization that wants to found. So in a sense, we say there's a menu, a buffet, and first thing, what would be in your range? That's one thing. The other thing is, depending on that, you can have either go for, let's say, local organizations or national level organizations, for example, in a sense, or on the opposite, try to have an effect more on a global landscape of the OA Diamond ecosystem. So depending on that, either you go, let's say, to the journals, to the local publishers, to book publishing, and so on, or you get to the infrastructure, which would have global effects on many journals or many book publishing systems. So this is really a mix between the missions of the organizations and the actual possibilities. But everything needs funding in a certain sense. So then we can hope that depending on these organizations, everything in a sense will be funded. And we'll see whether, but also it can be going to the famous capacity center, or in some places where the funder thinks that this landscape and this ecosystem is very important and should be supported, and leaving it to other organizations in order to dispatch the money where it is needed.
Thank you. Eva.
Well, maybe I can go on with what I think Didier also told, but when we think of the future of Diamond, we can also have different kind of main goals or visions. We can have smaller ones and grand ones. So if we look at, for instance, at the Michael study, we see these national archipelagos, and we should somehow keep them surviving. So some of them are threatened, and we should keep them from commercializations or flipping to APCs or something. So keeping what already exists alive and healthy is one goal. But then there is also this grand vision where we can envision more Diamond and having Diamond as a main model for publishing. And these different strategies, they are not opposed, but they do require different mechanism of funding and sustaining and different stakeholders. One thing that is in common for them are infrastructures, but the infrastructures, again, can be sometimes local or national, or they can be global. And we have to find different funding models for different visions and different goals, I think.
Indeed, thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Eva, for reflecting on that. Who should pay? I don't think that matters as much as the money comes in. So it can be pooled money from public funding or different stakeholders pooling together money. But I think the core idea behind, for example, the Finnish model, which I know quite well, is that, journals can't turn a profit, and they only get a state subsidy up to a certain degree that enables some degree of activity. But I think there should also be a thought behind it, how to make sure, like Eva said, that those that really prosper have an option to stay Diamond, and they can scale without having to compromise in the scholarly ownership or in the values of the journal. So I think that's a problem with many of these funding models, that they are capped, and they don't really encourage, for example, international collaboration that much, because they are national money pools. So if you would like to combine two national journals into a Nordic journals, you're not really incentivized to do so based on the current funding models, because you don't get probably more money, but you will have more publication volume and trouble on your table as an editor. So yeah, we should think about that, I think, about how to enable strong diamond OA publishing and not just artificially keeping them small by keeping resources small.
Thank you very much. Would the DIAMAS team, David or Victoria, like to add anything to that? Or do you just agree with all of your colleagues? You agree? Yes, I mean, I really like what you were saying, thinking about also this, if we want a bigger vision and to enable a really strong ecosystem, how are we going to fund that? If you think about, so there are some of us funding those many local initiatives, and somebody said, keep them alive. I would like them to thrive rather than just stay alive. Yes, but indeed, but how do we go up that level to have a bigger global effect, and go for that bigger vision? And also, I think David was also encouraging more international collaboration and funding and funds to make that happen, right? And I think that's something in this system that's really missing right now. And of course, the EC funding an important project like DIAMAS can help inform and help build capacity, which we are doing with the other work packages as well. But we also need to have capacity hubs in the different countries, and we need those to join up and to work with the Global Federation. So I think really to make a really good, strong stand in the scholarly communication space, we really need to rethink about funding some of the bigger vision that we want here, right? So thanks a lot for that. So something else I think that's really important and which has come out in some of these studies is the role of the institution is clear, but also the role of the national policymaker, funder, government funder. So in some areas, as Michaela said, there's consistent funding, and in some less so. So how do we encourage right across the board in Europe more nations and national policies to make a positive stand for OA Diamond, not just encouraging and stimulating that OA Diamond journals are considered in research assessment, but also when funding either the infrastructures or the journals, the platforms, etc. So how do we encourage those nations more to invest in this area? How should we do that going forward from some of the lessons that we've learned in these studies? Any good practices you'd like to share? Didier, thank you for getting us started off.
Yes, all these studies and DIAMAS is the last one to do so show there's a large inequality. Of course, we know it from Global North and Global South, and we know that South America has developed something. But we can see it clearly within Europe because, as it has been underlined, of the importance of the national funding schemes. So in some countries, let's say Croatia, France, Spain, Serbia, you can see that this basic layer of public funding is very, very important. So one way to answer your questions is first, be sure that these national schemes take into account one, open access as something that is important, which is not always the case for the moment. And then because of what is happening now, that is the insistence of predatory publishing, LLM importance and ChatGPT stuff into the articles and so on, this is the key moment to say, hey, open access and institutional publishing work well together within the diamond model. Here, you don't see predatory publishing. You don't see all this kind of stuff. So open access doesn't mean that everything goes through and it's just a kind of sewer for bad knowledge. No, this is exactly the opposite. So that's, I think, a key moment to show that and show that to national policy. The third thing, the third, let's say, level is really to show the, let's say, the good examples. That is, of course, there are international declarations on diamond support, Council of Europe, and so on. But to show that in some countries, and this is the work we've been doing right now in DIAMAS, some countries show, let's say, the right way, the good way, or at least a good way. And so to take examples on really nice successes is, I think, really important for the other nations to show that at a certain cost that is not that high compared to what is being spent currently into the publishing system or the higher education research system, there are solutions that can be put at the national level, which can take lessons from other nations.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect segue to Croatia, is it not? As a good practice of how it's, I'm seeing Eva doubting, but there are some countries in Europe that are very well organized and that have OA Diamond fully embedded in their system, but it comes with challenges, right, Eva? So
Exactly.
over to you.
Yes, exactly. And when you look at both Mikhail's study and the detailed study of DIAMAS Project, you can see that these national funding schemes differ very much. And if there is not a proper political decision in funding what really is valuable in our means, like equitable diamond publishing, then it can bring harm, or it can be destroyed very easily. And that's something, for instance, the national funding system that Mikhail referred to in Croatia, it doesn't exist anymore. So that can happen if there is not a clear political will behind it. And that's why it's really important that the European Commission now has clear guidance on the values of how the publishing systems should work. So this political guidance and what Didier mentioned, good examples of well-defined policies across Europe are something to guide other nations as well. It will not maybe be immediate, but it can happen through time and with advocacy and engagement.
Thank you so much for that. So true. I think the advocacy is really important. So both on the level, as you say, of the Commission, who can really provide guidance on how a more equitable functioning scholarly communication system can work and should work, but also within our regions and also internationally, we need to raise the profile, or just to highlight that most of this scholar-led institutional publishing is quality output. Right, so we still have work to do to showcase the work being done, the outputs, but also the means of funding, how this is also organized on national levels, and the importance of the political policy behind all of Diamond OA. We need to showcase some of that. So that is. We are going to be doing some of that in the rest of this year, so don't worry, we will be showcasing some of that later on this year. But before telling you about some of what's to come, I think I'm going to go over to some of the questions that somebody's been collecting in the chat, so that you can get a little bit more involved as well, and that we hear what you are interested in. So the first question I have here is, do the authors of the quoted studies think it's possible to quote an average per article cost, which includes all phases of service, peer review, editorial, publishing, distribution, cataloging, curation, in a not-for-profit, no-loss diamond organization? Now that's a question and a half. So I have some replies here. Maybe that has been, maybe you could speak to that openly online rather than in the chat. Could you just speak to that? Because I think that's a great question.
We had a long conversation during the presentations about that. So all of our studies are, well, really not focusing on this question of cost, but there are, let's say, 2 to 3 problems. So first thing is people never count costs the same way, depending especially how they consider income. I mean, is it a cost paid by whom, in which situation, how much you should consider is part of a publishing system, and so on and so on. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, if you look really in organizations within DIAMAS, the question is, all these costs is generously being given by institutions. It's not cost to them in the sense that they want to support this organization. So the problem for them is not the cost. The problem is it's part of their mission, and they want to support it. So the next question is how, as Vanessa would say, these organizations would thrive beyond these costs already being put by some organization, national schemes, and so on. And that's where the money comes in. On the top of it, in some organization at least, this money would enhance IPSPs to do more not in question of volume, but also to do better, in a sense. And of course, infrastructure has been said so on. So I think it's less a question of cost rather than how much do other organizations want to get into the game and support this organization based on whatever criteria. But we know they need money, and we know that this money will be well used.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else like to chime in there on that one? No? And yes, I think Didier's point is we shouldn't be focusing on another article processing charge, right? We're not trying to find a particular sum. And it is so context dependent. So we should really focus on the huge other qualities and of Diamond OA publishing going forward and sustaining that system wherever it is, whichever type of organization, country, or service that it provides. So I have another question here. A little bit unsure. Some things have been answered and some not. That one is just disappearing before my eyes. 1 second. So we have somebody saying, I hope that the current discussions on encouraging institutions to support Diamond will help install new mechanisms. Indeed. This, however, leaves the question, why aren't existing mechanisms not supported more? We have a very detailed support model in place at SciPost, but are being weighed down by too many institutional bystanders. Oh, what wise words. Thank you so much for that. We have got a little bit more time. You've packed a lot into that. But Jean-Sébastien, if you'd like to take the mic and speak a bit more to that. Otherwise, you can hold your breath and see what the others have to say about this one. I think it's a great question. Maybe you want to chime in once others have said something. Great, thanks for showing yourself. Go ahead.
I mean, thanks a lot. I don't want to occupy much time, but I do want to perhaps emphasize that there are existing systems that are already ready to upscale. And I think one of the situations now is that there's no flow of money enabling this upscaling. And I do view this as a missed chance because, first of all, these are perhaps nice demonstrations, nice experiments that we might want to upscale in the future. They might inform the kinds of mechanisms that you'd like to suggest and put in place at the European level, at the worldwide level. I think I feel a little bit as a scientist that there's not enough experimentation going on. There's not enough investment commitment into, turning the promises into realities here. And I'm kind of fearing that we might, for a long time, be merely discussing about improving things rather than actually getting down to it and doing it concretely. It's just a worry I have. And that, of course, impacts us at SciPost on a daily basis. So that's the context.
I know from some of the focus groups, some don't want to scale up, right? Some want to stay small, but there are others like yourselves who really would like to scale up and don't have the opportunities. But Didier, you're going to come in now. Go ahead.
Yes, very quickly, it's really clear, as you mentioned, that some organizations are going to stay small, but that doesn't mean the whole ecosystem is going to stay small, in the sense that how do you multiply this small scale? But other organizations and infrastructures need to be big, need to upscale. And that's where you see the weakness of the current system, in which local funding and institutional local support and national funding are the bread and butter of the ecosystem. And these need to upscale organizations then need money coming from everywhere. As I always say, APC money doesn't have any color of nationality. It comes from everywhere. And we should have mechanisms for these specific organizations that need to upscale to be able to receive that money in not necessarily the same way, but in a similar way to the APC model, without, of course, the hindrance of going predatory or being very, let's say, sensitive to volume publishing. So this is really important to understand both the diversity of the ecosystem, but also where current mechanisms are actually missing. So, and they are missing for many different reasons, including legal reasons. Because if you look at research funding organizations, almost all of them right now, they don't give money to the publishing system directly. They give it through grants. So one of the questions that has been asked into the chat is, of course, how authors should do it. And we're discussing in DIAMAS through this new name, voluntary author contributions, which is one thing. But also one of the questions that our own study and other things I've asked is, how can research funding organizations or other organizations which are currently not giving support to the DIAMAS ecosystem get into it, including, maybe it's easier for them, these big organizations like Cyprus.
Thank you. But Jean-Sébastien, you were also saying that some of those mechanisms, they exist. Why are not more contributing? So I'm curious if there's anybody in the audience who might like to say, what are those limitations that they would like to contribute, and that there isn't a mechanism, but they aren't able to, for a particular reason, pay to a certain extent their way forward in some way or other. Is there anybody who would like to share that, or maybe share some of the discussions around that in their organization? This is relatively new, this appeal to fund more. So you're not behind the times or anything here. So it's thinking about, how do we up our game here? Oh, thank you so much. Cameron, good to see you.
Hi, just getting myself situated. So just one point to share, and maybe, Raim Crow could also contribute to this point of the discussion, but when we were developing the subscribe to open model, a key feature of that was to try and ensure that what we were presenting to the libraries was not interpreted as a donative payment, because when we were looking for support from institutions, they were, largely going to be using their subscription budgets, and those were very, very narrowly defined as being, unable to support something that could be potentially interpreted as a donative payment. So I was just, writing a little note in the chat around the Scope 3 model and how we leverage the kind of proportional authorship across the journals at a country level. We look at a 2-year reference period. We look at all of the papers that were published, look at the authors, their countries of primary affiliation, and use that to determine kind of proportional use of the journals as an open access publishing vehicle for countries. And maybe that's a way for maybe some set of diamond journals to, approach at the country level funders or otherwise institutions directly to say, okay, your researchers are using this platform to publish their work. This is the proportional use. This is what the total cost would be, and maybe try and come up with some appealing way of getting them to repurpose their budgets or use open access funds to support the work.
Thanks a lot. Raim, would you like to come in and say something? Or maybe, no, Didier. Didier, go ahead.
Just to say that this is really interesting because in the DIAMAS study, but also in our own study, the subscribe to open or other collective models are really, really marginal. That is, we have been describing a world in which this almost doesn't exist. This is marginal. I wouldn't say it. So this is really interesting because once again, you have a diversity of funding models, a diversity of organization institutions, and we all know, and especially you, that the subscribe to open really works well when you have, in a sense, subscribers that are already there. So that means as a transition model from subscription, and we know that many societies, many journals, many book publishing, and so on, still work on the subscription model. And so this is really important for them to shift to Diamond OA rather than APC, BPC system. So in this kind of situation, this is really interesting, but clearly our respondents in the different studies are more, let's say on the other side, they are much more either really a small scale with subscription not being something that was really important on the money side, or they are native OA Diamond. So of course, it's much more difficult to have this kind of collective model. But then the question is, as we said, how can we build a collective models also for these actors beyond their, let's say, local institutional support? We were not disappointed, but surprised by the fact that the collective models were really, really marginal into the response and even not known by most of them.
Eva, go ahead.
Maybe just an explanation for this fact that it was so marginal in this. When you look at the sample of the DIAMAS study, it is very concentrated in certain European countries. So, and it happens to be especially Southern Europe, and collective funding models were not very successful until now in those areas. So it's not so strange that it wasn't present in our sample. It doesn't mean that it is not a viable future for certain types of organizations, and especially in some regions or Europe or globally, it could be very successful. So maybe we just have to be aware that not everything will be successful everywhere, and we have to devise different recipes for different countries and different regions and types of organizations.
Well said, Eva. Thank you. Raim.
Yeah, and just to perhaps follow up what Cameron's remarked and others, and I'm not, and probably to belabor the obvious, but really subscribe to open, I really wouldn't see as a collective model, and it really, but it also focuses on a different corpus of journals. It's not, it's really not supporting the Diamond journals. It's supporting a large, vast number of social science, humanities journals, especially, but also sciences that are subscription based. And so, I think it's, I think they're serving different audiences there.
Good point. Thanks very much, Raim. Victoria, oh, good that you're with us from the EC. Welcome. You can open your mic.
Yes, hi. Okay, so I have two screens here, and it's a bit confusing. This is still very interesting, and thank you very much. I mean, I learned a lot. I always do, and I'll try to read as much as I can as well. I was thinking, I mean, if we think of these services and the ISPSP essentially as, publishers and infrastructures, I mean that your studies also show that are very deeply embedded a lot of times with institutions, meaning the research organizations or other like public interest, let's say, organizations that support research mostly, right? That's what we're talking about. For me, this would be obviously in the future also the first funders, right? The first ones to support them. And so to continue having this support, I would assume that you need also good evidence of their use, of whom they're, good demonstration of their value overall. I mean, and also for national funders as well, right? So, and you showed some countries like my country, we've done in Greece so many things actually on open access publishing as well, and where I used to work earlier, but have not managed yet to convince the funders that this is, that this is important. My own very recent experience discussing with funders on supporting Open Research Europe to become, more embedded in the system, in the research system of Europe and beyond it. They're asking very specific questions. So when you're a funder, it's not like, oh, this looks good and I will continue funding it. No, I mean, I want to know who's using it, how much it costs. And I think here there is a demonstrated problem to say how much it costs. And for me, in-kind contribution doesn't say anything. It says that there is a cost that is in kind that I'm not counting because I don't know how much it is, or I'm saying it's in kind. How much does it cost? And especially also when you want to start a new initiative, for example, like we want with Open Research Europe, yes, you need to calculate how much it's going to cost, how much contribution you're going to ask. So knowing your costs and what the different activities cost is quite essential, I would say, to make also the arguments to funders. And so it's quite clear, for me, it's quite clear that you have also identified this archipelago of different sizes, right, of activity in different countries, for granted. And this also might change in the sense that it represents also a transition of many journals from print to, to digital, and then to open access, and then to being supported by some maybe national organizations that have the abilities not to act just for themselves, but to support more broader national. So I think maybe we will see that this thing will start morphing also differently in the future. But definitely, I mean, to support it financially, these publishers and these services need to know how much it costs and how much they should ask for. And for me, the more to achieve sustainability, the more they are embedded and are considered by the researchers as essential to the work. In other words, the more the value is demonstrated, the likelier it is that the funds will be found in any possible way, right? But and here, of course, it's work that needs to be done to demonstrate also the values. So, and for me, it seems that these different institutions, so the research institution, the national funder, they will definitely fund different parts, right? So you don't expect the AC to fund the operations of those services. You expect the AC, like in all the infrastructure. So for me, in the future, these things we would consider infrastructure, those that actually can demonstrate that the value to research communities is so integral that it must be funded not only by the institution, but also more broadly, right? And then the Commission would come on top to support this European dimension of those valued services. So I think we're on a good path, very good path. I think a lot of funders are now more aware that this is going on. And obviously this is part also of a systemic change, because if the researchers are more interested in the impact factor, they might not go to these journals, let's say, right? Or so a lot of work that is done in other relevant realms is going to feed into this. But I see different funders at different levels funding different things, definitely, and I see that these services and publishers should be able to demonstrate very clearly, qualitatively, quantitatively as well, their continued value, so that they continue to be funded, right? In other words, I mean, I would not necessarily assume because we have all these many journals and initiatives, they will continue living. I mean, so, but because, as you all know, of course, there is finite funding and it needs to be directed where it's most needed. So These were just some thoughts on top of my mind.
Thank you.
Also on internationalization, I can add one last thing, not as a funder, but when I used to work at the National Documentation Center, where we have a very nice service on electronic publishing that counts more than 70 journals currently, and for which we actually got a lot of inspiration from Open Edition, I would say, and with discussions with Pierre in the past. At the moment, and a lot of them were social science and humanities, they were transitioning from digital to print and open access at the same time. But also one of the features is that because a lot of them, most of them were in Greek, they did not have the international appeal. So what we did at the same time was upgrade their policies to accept papers in 4 other languages beyond Greek. Which actually was a deal breaker. I mean, you could see then that the audience changed, and that, of course, again, most of the audience was Greek, of the authorship rather, but not all. You could see that they started penetrating, and so some of them, granted in the SSH, have a European appeal, although they are published in Greece, and although most of their papers are in Greek, but also in other languages. So I would recommend that very highly as a way to reach beyond a country, but also maintain the national, let's say, or language, but the bibliodiversity and character. And I stop.
Thank you so much for your intervention, Victoria. You took away some of my summary. We've now already reached the end of our webinar. Sorry, Tony, to let you down there. But I just would love to still tell you that there is a lot more to come from us. We've sketched out the landscape. You've got the DIAMAS report now. Please go ahead and read it, circulate it, share it. We've reached about halfway mark of DIAMAS, as already said, but by the end of this year, we're going to be coming out with some national overviews to better understand the funding and publishing landscape from 10 European countries, as context is king here. We've been hearing about today. We will be coming out with recommendations, areas for future collaboration, as well as some of the challenges with that. We touched on it, but we will be providing more info on that. There's going to be a financial sustainability workflow and tool with questions to guide you as publishers or service providers when you can self-assess to what extent you consider yourself to be financially sustainable. So I think hopefully that will be really useful to you. And above all, we want to also have a list of revenue models. Some of them were touched on today, and case studies that publishers and service providers in the future can draw upon. But it doesn't take away the fact that, as Jean was telling us, you know, we know about some of these models, but they just need to work, and more need to be contributing and paying their way forward. So what I wanted to ask is if there's anybody in the room as a library, an institution, a research funder or a charity, and you are helping fund Diamond OA, we'd really like to hear from you. So to highlight some of those case studies where those good practices, where it is happening. So please do send us an email at info@sparkeurope.org, and we will then get in touch with you. So we will be bringing all of these resources together in a suite of sustainability resources, and we'll be putting that into the future DIAMAS Capacity Hub. And we'll also, in the next few months, be speaking to a range of research funding organizations to see what they can do and how in their administrative and legal framework. So I'd just like to thank now at the end, Andrea Davidson and Camilla Haycock from my team who have been supporting us with the webinar today. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Also to all members of the DIAMAS Sustainability work package who have also been working on this study. And of course, thanks to the project leads, Johan Rorik and Pierre Mounier, I see also in the room, and to all of you who made the time to come today. We hope to see you later on this year at a follow-up event where we can share more on how to help sustain Diamond OA in even more detail. So in the meantime, if you haven't yet signed up to the DIAMAS newsletter, please do, and follow our developments on the webpage or through any of the colleagues you met today. Thank you so much for coming, and We'll be in touch soon, and please be in touch with us with your good practices. Thanks all. Have a good afternoon.